Good afternoon, colleagues. I think she has said a lot about me, so I don't have much to say for myself. Except that my name is Dr. George, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer of the Armed Forces of Liberia. I'm very glad to share this high table at the bottom of the class, and I hope that we have a very fruitful interactions at the end of this presentation. Let me say here, first of all, is there anyone among you or a person you know who served in the 101st Airborne Department of Liberia? Anyone of you? No? Okay. But basically, it's just to show appreciation to the U.S. Army for their level of work done in Liberia during the time of the outbreak. Their response at the time was very significant, and they brought a lot of changes in the way that we format our response activities, especially in ETU. I must say here also that their responses were not just limited to Ebola, but a few of them also went the extra mile to identify with orphanage children, less fortunate women especially, and identify the communities in which they found themselves. I think that's commendable to the military or the Air Force, the U.S. Army at the time. So this presentation composed of several information from several places. When I was asked to do this presentation, I was researching, went to the Ministry of Health, of course I looked in our archives. This is not my first time sharing my experience with the Ebola outbreak in Liberia. This is about my third time. First was done in Atlanta, Accra, when Dr. Adams and I first met physically. And then second was just about 2 months ago in Thailand at the Mahidol University. So I'm glad to share my experience with you. But first, let's look at some historical perspective of Liberia. As you may be aware, Liberia is a West African nation. That is, it is situated on the west coast of Africa. It is bordered by 3 countries. This is Sierra Leone to the west, Guinea north, and the Ivory Coast to the east. And of course, we have the Atlantic Ocean. Liberia has a very close historical tie to the United States of America. For the fact that Liberia was founded by settlers or missionaries who thought to return slaves to Africa at the end of the slave trade or abolition of slavery in America, and then returned to restore slaves to Africa. And the first batch of slaves that were returned to Africa landed actually at the Providence Island, which is an island in Liberia, where these missionaries, along with the settlers, settled down and decided to establish a home for themselves. So this actually took place in the year 1822 under the American Colonization Society. And following that, a few of them decided to break away from the American Colonization Society and organize themselves into a Commonwealth. So a few years after, specifically in July 1847, the Commonwealth leaders drafted a Declaration of Independence, which is pretty much synonymous to the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. Likewise, the Constitution that was drafted also was similar to the Constitution of the United States of America. So as a result of that Declaration of Independence, Liberia became an independent nation in the year 1847. This year, July 26th, we are celebrating 170 years of existence as a nation in Africa. Basically, the area of Liberia spans about 43,000 square miles. We have an estimated population of about 4.3 million people. And of course, most of this population, 60%, is comprised of youth. You may be aware also there is a historical event that occurred in Liberia before this Ebola outbreak. And that event actually took place in 1989. That was the beginning of the 14-year civil war, considered very bloody, very destructive. And at the end of the civil war, Liberia was like set back more than 30 years back in time. This is because most of the economy of Liberia at the time were run by foreign investors. Businesses were run by also foreign investors. So as a result of the prolonged senseless war, investors pulled out. So 14 years of stalemate, 14 years of destruction, 14 years of killing the lives of innocent people, 14 years of displacing their own citizens to other countries, even as far as the United States, left Liberia as a nation in destitute. at the end of the war in 2003. So, during peace accords and peace arrangement and what have you, they decided that Liberia moved forward, and then we had an election in 2005, and of course we elected our first female African president, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Now, her tenure in 2006 were faced with so many challenges. The country to move forward, a group of people, or let's say a generation of two, who have not sat in classroom, who are going to focus on destroying, looting, all right? Most of our educated, trained, or professional Liberians have left and settled in other countries. So basically, we're brain drained. So she had a huge challenge of rebuilding Liberia from 2006. And much of the challenges were faced on the security and economic aspect, because why? Investors who are left have found solid ground elsewhere, and two, the rationale of reinvesting in Liberia would have cost them even more than what they initially did, and even generated less than what they would at the end of their investment, so these companies stayed away. By the way, most of our resources that we survive on, or we live on as a country, comprise of iron ore, export, and rubber. We also do export of diamonds and gold, but the two major exports of Liberia are iron ore and rubber. So the two major iron ore companies, as well as the rubber company, pull out and said we cannot come back. So we were very, very stalemate economically. So this is a challenge for Madam President. At the end of the Civil War, one of the discussions held during the peace discussion and negotiation was that the armed forces of Liberia, which is supposed to be the national army, participated in the war as a faction because they had loyalty to a particular group of people and not to the country as a whole. The then president elect Samuel Doe is known for an ethnic group, and majority of the forces in the armed forces of Liberia were of his ethnic group. Definitely they had loyalty to him. So they took side in the war. So at the end of the war, the general consensus was that all warring factions be disbanded, and that included the armed forces of Liberia. So the regional armed forces of Liberia, along with the other warring factions, the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, the IPFL, all became disbanded, and the new armed forces of Liberia started reconstruction or started restructuring in 2006. Of course, this has been accomplished by our historical partner first, America. And then also they encouraged the participation of West African nations, especially Nigeria, who was also very helpful in resolving or ending the war in Liberia. Remember, Nigeria was the force that took the lead for the West African forces to put boots on the ground when there was chaos all over. So we give also credit to Nigeria. As you can see here, this is a U.S. officer. Behind me is his troop. And this officer here is the Nigerian general, seconded to the armed forces of Liberia. And of course, that's Her Excellency Madam President giving the passing review. So the armed forces of Liberia began as a multinational force, comprising of U.S. personnel, ECOWAS personnel, as well as the new AFL personnel who we are recruiting or creating or training. So that tells you that the armed forces of Liberia is very young, right? It's very young. So up to 2015, we have been commended by the Nigerian general, peace be to his ashes, as soon as he turned over office to Liberia's own general. A few months later, he was sick and he died. So we have our Liberian general, who's now the chief of staff of the armed forces of Liberia. And of course, most of the American troops that were involved with our restructuring have also returned. And our Liberia is now a standalone army. But of course, we are faced with the same challenges as the entire nation. On a resource, on a social debt, and we can say inexperienced group of people. So the medical unit, which is a part of the armed forces of Liberia, which is called BECOM, also is very small and comprised of very, very trained, unexperienced personnel. Of course, you have just one medical doctor as yourself. That's me, I'm a civilian. Okay. But as I came into the system or into the Ministry of Defense, my priority was that we train more of our personnel to become professional. So since 2012 to present, we have trained about 13 to 18 professional armed forces laboratory personnel. We have trained physician assistants, we have trained nurses, we have trained laboratory technicians, we have trained other staff, including imaging technicians, to the level of bachelors thus far, about 13 to 18. That also will help and assist on the biggest embassy. Now, so this is where we are. But another general overview of Liberia was that at the end of the war, due to the challenges, one of the areas of the country that was underdeveloped or underprepared is the health sector. That's because of the lower, the less income that was being generated by the government, which should we prioritize in investment in. So we saw that at the time, because we had the MSF, we had Medicine Sans Frontières, MSF, and we have Norwegian health institution providing, let's say, humanitarian care during the war, even after the war. And then they saw the need to continue to provide such care. We saw that most of the work of the health sector was being run by humanitarian organizations, NGOs, all right, the WHO, even United States government. So Liberia had little input in the development of the health sector in Liberia. So we also have challenges with health workers. Liberian doctors, we have very few. Nurses, we have very few. Laboratory technicians, we have very few. So the entire health sector is also under-staffed, underachieved as respect to post-war Liberia. So we had this awakening in 2014, that is the Ebola disease outbreak in West Africa, which is today described as the most unprecedented infectious disease outbreak in modern time, involving 3 nations mainly, or other African nations, as we'll see later on. So if you see this diagram, this is like, Guinea, this is Sierra Leone, this is Liberia. This area is a settlement or a town in Guinea, Zerikore or Dekelu, where the index case of Ebola came from. If you can see it, it is strategically located almost in the middle of the 3 countries. One at the outbreak starting here, one at here, one at this extreme, one at this extreme, one in the middle of the 3 countries. Now, what I want you to do for yourself or for us is that this map is borrowed from the WHO website. Google search it. And the reason why it is important and very fascinating is that the map, when you find it on the WHO website, and you click, this is the first image on the map, and this is the last image. So if you click here, it gives you like real-time progress of the Ebola disease outbreak transmission, the number of cases, the dates, and everything up to here. So this is actually the last image of the outbreak of the declare free, and this is actually the first one out of index cases. So you see in each region, time, the number of disease case load, the number of deaths, everything are recorded there. So you can find that in the WHO website. You'll be very, very fascinated about what you see. So, at the time of the outbreak in Liberia or in West Africa, we did not know much about Ebola virus disease. We've heard 1 or 2 instances of outbreak in East Africa or Central Africa, which we thought had no relationship to us. How many focus on maybe malaria, HIV, TB, malnutrition, and what have you, right? How disease, that's our concern. But like Ebola, we got to have something from Central Africa by ourselves. So until, even as we heard that Ebola case, because initially the actual case here, this first case, actually took place in 2013, December, in Guinea. Initially, based on the presented signs and symptoms, it was thought that that person or those persons affected were mimicking signs and symptoms of Lassa fever. If you have heard of Lassa fever, it's also endemic in the West African region. It's also a hemorrhagic disease. So it was Lassa fever. So they sent over to Liberia asking for river variant. to manage the cases. When the treatment failed, then of course, MSF, WHO said no, this is something else, it's most likely this is Ebola. How can this be Ebola when we are so far from Central and East Africa? But again, through tests, by the time we reached March, it was confirmed that indeed the outbreak in Guinea that was spreading slowly to Sierra Leone and Liberia was Ebola. Before we began to research the books, research and say, what is Ebola? How does Ebola manifest? How does it spread? How do we manage? How do we treat? And what do we do? So in other words, the entire health system was confused by the news that Ebola was in West Africa. And even at that, we had not quickened ourselves to prepare enough for a possible case that would enter into Liberia. What should we do? We did not, until we saw our first case entering Liberia in March from Guinea. That case subsided, obviously the next case died. And then in May again, we got reinfected from Sierra Leone. And that was the beginning of our turmoil with respect to Ebola virus disease. So, disease spread, and that in this case, like we said here, this area of Liberia is called Lofa County, and this bordering town to this area here is called Fuya. So that's where this index case came from. And of course, the people living around here are all close relatives. There's almost like no borderline except for Liberia. You just walk across the border, you sort of they settled there, so they are just one all right? So how we have stopped or prevented, that was another challenge, that's a story for another time. So when the virus entered through Lofa County, Fuya, from Guinea, it began to spread very, very rapidly. It overwhelmed our health system because we were unprepared, unequipped, and we tend to turn over and look up to the WHO, MSF for help, for guidance, and for direction on what to do. And then people began to say, well, let's set up Ebola treatment unit. So the first Ebola treatment unit, Team Liberia, is there anybody from Team Liberia? Team Liberia, who's going to Liberia? Okay, along the way I will call one or two important sites related to Ebola that you may need to see. So one of that sites is the Elward Hospital, ELWL Hospital. That was where we first set up the first ETU, and that was the biggest during the outbreak, and that ETU is very significant, as we'll see later on. So if you get to Monrovia, this will out for Elward Hospital. So, down to August 6th, based on the unprecedented nature of the Ebola outbreak in Liberia and how it was being managed by the health sector, obviously it overwhelmed the health sector. It became a disaster, and then the president had to intervene, coming in or implementing what we call a state of emergency, thus halting every other activity, right and privilege of all other government institutions, and focusing efforts and attention on the response to the Ebola virus outbreak in Liberia. So state of emergency was declared on August 6, 2014. Of course, a lot of lives were lost. By May 9, 2015, we've had about 3,150 confirmed cases with 4,700 and of course 85 deaths. Of course, most of the deaths were confirmed, suspected cases. Number of health workers who were affected by the virus who came down was affected 387. The number of health workers who we lost 192. That includes medical doctors, that includes specialists, that includes physician assistants, that includes laboratory technicians, that also includes mostly nurses as well. And then, of course, it spread across the country, and then every county in the country reported different patterns of disease infection across the country. So there wasn't a particular pattern that you follow and say, okay, let's respond in this manner. As you're responding in Montserrat County along this route, it comes from the east, up and down, a different pattern of spread of the disease And so the strategy had to be changed over and over again along the way. But however, adjustment was made in the strategies, and then the resolve to respond in a manner that will return to zero. So the president had a presidential advisory committee on Ebola set up in her office, and also the Ministry of Health and Social Welfare. They also established an incident management system, which today has become the Department of Public Health in the Ministry of Health. Originally, we have never had public health office or public health department in the Ministry of Health or in our health system. As a result of this, the need to establish the Department of Public Health was set up and that came from the incident management system. So how decisions are made, info plans or decisions are made in order to move forward in addressing the outbreak. So you see this graph. It tells you when we started dragging on May, June, and when we started to pick up from August, September, peak high of October, November. Okay, it's between October, November that I think, I don't remember the actual date of October, November, that the OUA, Operation United Assistance, which comprised of the 101st Airborne, was deployed to Liberia to assist in the Ebola response. During this period also, especially during August to September, what we did as the military, as you can see here, these are all scenes, basically how people fall in the street and die because a lot of health centers or hospitals are shut down because they have been overwhelmed. They did not have the expertise to respond, and so they turned over to look up onto the Ebola treatment unit been set up here and there to respond. So even diarrhea cases or severe malaria cases are all considered as malaria. And people die from other conditions simply because they wouldn't have access to the hospital or healthcare centers. People are admitted into Ebola treatment units with simple malaria cases, but again, people not tell, and due to the high-risk nature, the widespread virulence of the disease, the slightest fever was considered a suspected Ebola case, and so were referred to Ebola treatment units for assessment, confirmation, and what have you. So people fell in the street die, thereby the team moving, is the public awareness, sensitizing people, and of course, let me make this a notation. Now, at the level of the health system, there was little knowledge about Ebola. So it was difficult to actually see the effective messages to the public to understand and accept the disease and follow suit with preventive measures. Because people already began to develop myth in their mind that what you are calling Ebola is not Ebola. You don't even know Ebola, this and that. Okay? This is different, this is that. Somebody was in my home, they had diarrhea, I'm feeling this, diarrhea stuff, and the person says, oh, that's not Ebola you're talking about. Alright? So there were so many myths and misconceptions about the Ebola virus disease, even at the outbreak level when the disease was talking about. So we had two fronts to approach the response. One, the case that presented to the facilities and the ETU, and then two, the population, how to disorientate their mind from those mythical thinking, because that was where the virus was actively spreading. You will see that in the churches, people who were sick and who couldn't go to the hospital, they went to the churches for the pastors to lay hands on them and pray for them. And at the end of the day, the pastor became infected, his wife became infected, the entire church, or most of the people of the church also became infected. And all of a sudden, the ETU, and most of them died. The Islamic faith, on the other hand, their burial rites of washing the body, cleaning the body, doing all kinds of rituals for the body before burial, also saw a lot of imams and their mosque mates and who said, oh, coming down with the virus, and also succumbing and dying of the virus, also in Liberia. All right? Then, of course, you have community members, you have homes where people decided not to report the cases of someone who was having fever or presented with signs and symptoms of diarrhea, vomiting, but instead decided to hold them in a home and manage them. Until at the point where they show that they were dying before they would open up and say, oh, this person is dying and coming down. So that spread far and wide. The myth, the misconception, fueled the spread of the virus more than the virus could spread itself. And of course, the strange practice ancestry because in Liberia we usually will bury our dead. But as a result of the overwhelming nature of the virus and infection, the outbreak, obviously when the president announced the state of emergency, even business people too presented themselves to assist. So the crematorium was used by the Indian community in Liberia to cremate their dead. That's what they've been doing before. A lot of us didn't even know that crematorium existed in Monrovia or in Liberia until the Ebola outbreak. So they came and donated the crematorium as their own support to the response that instead of burying the dead in communities or areas, they rather be cremated because the virus was spreading so fast. And of course, communities also were resisting burying in their communities. And that's how the military came in, you see here, education, high-level discussions, and maybe this whole nature of partnership, so the physical response according to the IMC. We'll get back to this slide. So you can see. So what we did during the outbreak, knowing the level of capabilities that we had and how lacking and how unprepared we were with respect to the military health system, our biggest tool was to educate our people in the various barracks, educate our soldiers, educate their spouses, and also provide support for one of our, let's say most of our people who we consider have had contact and were placed under quarantine. So go back to the story. So there's the Muslim burial rights here. One is here trying to say the last prayer, but they haven't been convinced that it has to be buried properly or handled properly, and not the way we usually do it. So the burial team was present, they provided body bag, placed the bodies in the body bag. Of course, they will see us spreading around, and the phone was right, people were taking for burial. Okay? So, of course, on August 8th, the WHO announced and declared that the outbreak in West Africa had reached an emergency of international concern. So just about 2 days after we declared state of emergency, the WHO declared also public health emergency of international concern. Also, in December 2015, the WHO declared end of transmission in Guinea. In January 2016, declared end of transmission in Liberia. In March 2016, declared end of transmission in Sierra Leone. Of course, at the first declaration, we again had another case of Ebola in the community that was quickly responded to. And of course, we have declared again for the second time in June 2016. First time was January 2016, second time was June 2016, 2016, second time. So on the overall, we declared free of Ebola about 3 different times. So the response, according to the Ministry of Health, the military, what the military did, before we come to this one, the military, what we did as a military, because of the widespread resistance from the communities and some threats of attack to health workers who were trying to do their work, searching in the communities for suspected cases, carrying on surveillance, collecting dead bodies and trying to find places to bury the dead. There was a lot of resistance from the communities, and so some of them were being attacked. And then the military and the police have been called in to provide security and escort to the health teams. So surveillance team had security of vehicle escort behind them. And also police, the burial team also had them as well. So this was where one of our first move was to ensure that those of our men who were being asked to form part of the Operation White Shield, that was the armed forces of Liberia's operations for Ebola response. Operation White Shield, they had honorable basic Ebola training, especially with the donning and doffing of the PPE. So we had several classes with them, to them basic about Ebola viral disease, that will help workers that will provide safety. But in case there should be, let's say, instance where they might need to maybe get involved and have to be fully protected wearing the PPE, so we demonstrated how to do that. Okay? And that was one of the major support we gave to the military and the Ministry of Health. Also, when Operation White Shield came, Operation United Assistance, the 101st U.S. Airborne, one thing that they did, that's what I said they did very significantly in the response, was that they tried to train health workers, because there were several reports of how health workers or volunteers were managing the cases in the Ebola treatment unit. They didn't seem properly organized. So they came in with training. So everyone who came to participate in the response had to go through this training. And this training is so significant in that it did not involve sitting in the classroom, but it also involved real-life situation in a mock ETU. So they set up places in a field, design and partition it like an ETU unit, and then drill you through on how to manage cases door to door. And but then we have begun to have survivors. So they brought in survivors to demonstrate and behave like some of the patients would do in the ETU setting, and then observe how the team will respond to that scenario. So that was also very important, and I helped a lot of people to prepare themselves better for the ETU. So we concluded trainings, several people, including NGOs, international organizations, who came to provide support to response and how to go through the training provided by Operation United Assistance. So, what went wrong during our Ebola outbreak or response? One was that we have a weak health system, obviously, that was skewed to curative than preventive, as I told you before. Most of what we did was just clinical, curative, and we didn't have anything much to do with prevention. So this is one thing that was wrong with our health system. We didn't have a prevention or public health system in place. So what about doctors, nurses, physicians, administrators going on to treat cases and not prevention? So this was wrong according to the assessment. What also went wrong, we have poor IPC practices and weak disease surveillance. For most of us, or for most of the health workers, it was during the Ebola outbreak that we got to know how surveillance can be conducted or how it's carried out. Poor preparedness and response capacities to the disease of epidemic potential. I told you before, when we heard that a case in Guinea, that we thought was Lassa fever, but rather became Ebola, we still did not find the time or the resources to put ourselves in order, but instead we waited until we had 2 bouts of infections, one from Guinea, one from Sierra Leone, before we started putting ourselves together. So our preparedness was very poor. And of course, this issue, we have underpaid and low competence of the healthcare workforce for epidemic response. I must say here that at the time of the height of the Ebola outbreak, most, like I said, hospitals were shut down, health workers also sat out. So mostly people who were involved were volunteers, just walk into the ETU and say, I want to work. Had no knowledge of health or what I do. Were trained, take part like you said, and then put into the ETU. So as a result of this, they consider themselves employed just by volunteering and going to the ETU, consider themselves employed, but not knowing that they were working under an emergency situation, and so the issue of pay or compensation wasn't discussed. So it became about 2-3 months later when that was another problem with the staff who were responding. And how we are working, we are not getting paid. So they went on strike. Volunteers went on strike. And then it was the World Bank that had to come in because government did not have money to pay. There were so many. Even the health workers were there. They could not employ health workers or volunteers. So it was the World Bank that taking a total responsibility to provide compensation for the volunteers for the continue working in the ETU. We had a centralized healthcare system that was now focused on community engagement and empowerment. So as a result of the responses that were being conducted in the various communities throughout the country, we realized that involving the community dwellers in the response was very important. And as such that our healthcare system was having in place a way to engage and involve the communities in order to be successful in most of our programs. And of course, we are ineffective regional coordination institution or mechanism, okay? Few months, Ebola in Guinea, we did not coordinate well with Guinea or Sierra Leone. Ebola spread to Sierra Leone, we did not coordinate well, and we waited till Ebola came to Liberia, and we became the worst hit. We had the highest cases, we have the highest death as compared to the other countries and elsewhere. So what worked? What really worked during the Ebola response? Integrated government system and strong international partnership capitalized by presidential leadership. Like we said, when the president came in and declared a state of emergency, she took the charge of the response, directing all government resources, all government assets to ensuring that health workers who needed to do surveillance had to do surveillance, those who needed security had to be escorted by security, the appropriate security apparatus, and the police or the military. And our resources were being mobilized from the international community through our efforts to ensure that supplies are available to keep the response going. There was also strong coordination at both the national and the sub-national level. We also decentralized the response, not only at the Ministry of Health, but in the different counties and districts. There were sub-health response teams that were established there to run the response activities in the various settings. There was also robust and aggressive build-up approach and response capacity and capabilities. Like for instance, social mobilization, like we said, mobilizing the community to get involved, mobilizing the community to accept the fact that we have an outbreak that was contagious and very dangerous, mobilizing the community to accept that the health workers needed to do their jobs, all right, and they should not be interfered with. All of these things were very, very robustly done. And we had increased number of ETUs, and especially with the coming in of Operational United Assistance, and where one of their major mandates was to construct ETUs in all of the 15 subdivisions of Liberia